Back a couple years up, and we ended up looking at a game that was fairly last minute for our Halloween episode. A strange undertaking that took the Warhammer End Times universe and placed it into a very Left 4 Dead style game, where a squad of players would face off against hordes of ratmen attempting to reach a goal. Only through playing it did the differences between Vermintide and Left 4 Dead become much more apparent. It was overall a bit of a sleeper hit, garnering a bunch of attention and praise from news outlets, becoming one of our favorite games of that year. After a few DLCs, we were shown a sequel that improved on many lesser aspects of the original, and garnered far more media attention than anyone saw coming. Now that the game's been out for a while, we've had a chance to familiarize with it to a level even far greater than the original. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Vermintide 2. Vermintide 2, or for those who like having far too many words in their titles, Warhammer The End Times Vermintide 2, is obviously the sequel to 2015's Vermintide. As a co-op shooterish game, it garnered a lot of fair and unfair comparisons to Left 4 Dead. With the new game, the criticism is still applicable, but they're not nearly as on point as the original. There's plenty of improvement here in the way it handles loot distribution, quality of the encounters and maps, and of course choices in how to play the game, but pedant's gonna ped. Those who remember the original video on Vermintide might remember just how much the review gushed over Warhammer as a franchise and the game's accuracy to its source material, which was mostly the doing of our co-writer Dreskar, being a long-time Warhammer fan. Well, since I'd been so focused on indie stuff, I had Dreskar take the reins once again, not only in editing this video, but he's written the entirety of the script from this point on, while I just read whatever he's written down once we've both gone over this. As Dreskar obviously deserves a raise and doesn't get nearly enough respect around here, I'm just going to end up reading whatever he writes down, and I won't be the wiser for it. Argle Bargle Purple Monkey Dishwasher. Hey, wait a minute! Vermintide 1 was no slouch when it came to graphical fidelity and dark fantasy aesthetics, but it's easy to see that Vermintide 2 is an incredibly good-looking game. Part of this comes from lessons learned in the original game, especially when it comes to dynamic lighting and making one level revolve around darkness, much like a certain DLC that we'd showcase in a backtrack. Locations now vary from snowy mountaintops, dark mine shafts, swamps, forests, burning cities, cities collapsing into a vast chasm, and even dwarven holds that showcase the dwarves' unique engineering. That lighting comes into play with the various spells or fire systems from Sienna and Barden respectively, who can send gouts of fire at enemies, lighting up the surrounding area and setting Skaven and Northmen on fire with animated thrashing, rolling, and even blackening of their skin to accompany it. The game also keeps a very crisp aesthetic, so picking out specific enemies or understanding attacks is far easier than if they'd went for a purely realistic tone. This adds to the gore as well, since cleaving through Skaven will leave bits of guts or spines hanging out, and they're animated to react to many attacks that will cleave off their limbs. Really, the game as a whole is simply a visual treat, and adds to that wonderful sensation of joy when you plow through an oncoming horde and watch the limbs and blood fly. Attention to detail was further highlighted in the new home base for the Uberstrike 5, in the form of an abandoned castle. The castle itself will get slowly nicer looking the higher in level you get with your characters, and even unlock personal bedrooms for each when you hit level 10 with them. These rooms just add a little extra layer of personality to each of the characters, from Barden's literal hot tub, to Saltspire's careful autopsy and torture of Skaven, complete with breakfast nook, and of course the personal favorite being Sienna's scorched bed frame in an entirely torched room. Well, Jesker Kite is at it again, and oh boy is the score for Vermintide 2 incredible. The music choice for the game is very well done, keeping the odd and uncomfortable guitar scratching from the first game, and adding in more bass and atmosphere, especially for Chaos Forces, while throwing in orchestral vocals to accent high moments of action and tension, or to convey the general somber mood. In general, outside of a few boastful remarks from the Uberstrike 5, the world as a whole seems very keenly aware that they stand on the edge of oblivion. One that doesn't look possible to be stopped, but they're gonna give it their damnedest try anyway. Now the quality of sound effects is top-notch, and there is a lot of satisfaction to be had simply cleaving through the hordes of ratty bastards with a great axe or blowing off the head of some Northman with a rifle. Essentially, if we were to keep score of such things, the game would get top marks.
The elf has perished!
This extends nicely to the banter between the heroes, ranging from playful jabs, actual compliments, Carillion being arrogant again, and great exchanges back and forth between the cast. In contrast to Left 4 Dead, which we'll bring up again later, the characters are actually having a conversation with each other, as opposed to one character just spouting off some monologue before a pre-scripted quick finisher is stated. Some of the best back and forth banter is if you decide to use some healing supplies while you're only lightly wounded.
Honestly, Barden, you're as bad as the elf for wasting our healing.
Aye, well, perhaps us elder races have learned a thing or two about the importance of our health.
Oh, self-important, certainly. Don't do it again.
Further helping are the audio cues for each enemy type, allowing you to accurately pinpoint where a Storm Vermin patrol or one of the new and deadly Chaos Warrior units might be, and even adding in subtle touches like the maddening songs of the Chaos Sorcerer. Every enemy class has unique audio, and telling differences between them is what can make the difference between a successful high difficulty run and constant failure. Starting out, we need to get something out of the way. If you're coming into this game expecting Left 4 Dead or something similar, you will be very disappointed. Other than the most basic comparison, like Team of 4 versus Hordes and special enemies directed by an AI, the two play nothing alike. So despite what you may have heard from casual observers, and sometimes even reviewers, you will have a bad time if you try and play it like Left 4 Dead, so let's get into why that is. When you first start up the game, you'll be taken to the tutorial mission. This is here to showcase Kruber's playstyle. Since Kruber's starting class is ideal for the tutorial, as you're tasked with escaping the clutches of the Skaven Horde while they work on repairing the Skittergate. This is your introduction to the various personalities of the hero cast and learning how some skills work. As you play the game's missions, you'll slowly gather focus, which can then be used by pressing F when the bar fills to fire off your character's unique ability. Some characters and classes will build up focus faster than others, and as these are dramatically different, it'll benefit you and the team as a whole if you at least know what each character's class special is, so that potions can be spread around accordingly. Once you've finished rescuing 4 of the 5 heroes, with Saltzpyre being the only member of the Uberstrike 5 that didn't get captured and is securing your exit, you'll be taken to your new base, which is set up within an old abandoned castle protected by obscuring magic. This acts much like the inn from the first game, allowing you to use talent points, craft new gear, and test out equipment against test dummies, even if they are a little bit buggy at the time of the review. Each of the 5 characters comes with 3 different classes, and generally can be broken down to tank, DPS, and support. Yet it should be noted that each character being so different means their classes also don't act the same. This does have the unfortunate feeling that while you have choice, there is really only one correct choice for each character, beside Kruber, who has a strong case that all 3 of his classes can be useful on higher difficulties. It should be noted as well that you can't just choose the other classes at will, and the following list is presented in the order that you unlock them for each character, which is starting, level 7, and level 12. Let's start with Kruber, who has the most health of all characters, and the following classes. Mercenary, a standard melee class with a passive Pace Strikes, which increases attack speed by 10%, cleave and critical chance for 6 seconds if you hit more than 3 enemies with 1 attack. The real benefit to this class is the class ability known as Morale Boost, which grants temporary health and knocks enemies back. Yet the true usefulness of Morale Boost is that it can be upgraded later in the talent tree to actually cause downed allies to stand back up, which can help him turn a wipe around. Huntsman, originally one of the most overpowered classes in the game before it was nerfed, has the passive ability Waste Not, Want Not, which gives back ammo for every headshot, essentially giving him a free shot for good accuracy. That passive also has the benefit of removing damage fall-off from long-range attacks, turning Kruber into one nasty sniper, while also giving a crit chance aura around him. The class ability, though, is a bit more of a letdown, known as Hunter's Prowl, as it just puts Kruber into stealth for a short time. Knight essentially turns Kruber into a walking buff tank with the passive Protective Presence, which grants a damage resistance aura for the team while giving Kruber extra stamina and damage reduction. The class's special ability is known as Valiant Charge, where Kruber sprints forward, knocking over all enemies in his path, including bosses, which makes him a great crowd control character. Barden, the lovable and affable dwarf, has the following classes. Ranger, one of the least useful classes for higher difficulties, but has a decent passive, Survivalist, which gives Barden double ammo capacity, increased reload speed, and causes all special enemies to drop ammo on their death, while his active ability Disengage has him throw down a smoke bomb to go into stealth for a while. Ironbreaker, widely considered the greatest tank class and overall team hero in the game, with the passive Dromroll Armor, which allows him to ignore one hit every 20 seconds regardless of how much damage it would have done, and it gives him extra added stamina, stun resistance, and damage resistance. The career skill adds to this unkillable reputation with Impenetrable, which has Bard and Taunt all man-sized enemies and bosses if you get the upgrade, within 10 units around him for 10 seconds, and gives 100% blockability against all attacks. Slayer is a very squishy yet incredibly potent DPS that cannot use any ranged attacks, with the passive Trophy Hunter, which is a stacking damage buff on hit and increased attack speed. This is the class that lets Barden dual-wield axes, and his class ability Leap lets him literally pounce into fights and grants an attack speed bonus further. Saltzpyre, the pious Knight Templar of Sigmar, has Witch Hunter Captain, currently a severely underpowered class that focuses on support, with the passive Witch Hunt, which is tagged enemies take additional damage, no block cost for blocking frontal light attacks, and all critical headshots will instantly slay man-sized targets. The class ability Animosity boosts critical chance for all party members nearby, and does push away enemies, but is very lacking in use. The Bounty Hunter, widely considered the only real choice for Saltzpyre, with the passive Blessed Shots, which guarantees a critical ranged hit every 8 seconds or after a melee kill, double ammunition capacity, and increased reload speed. Combined with the skill Locked and Loaded, which fires an incredibly powerful shot that pierces enemies, the Bounty Hunter can easily one-shot some of the toughest enemies in the game, and friendlies if the player has especially poor aim. Zealot, sometimes seen in higher difficulties, comes with a passive Fiery Faith, wherein power increases by 5% for every 25 health missing, up to 20%. Uninterruptible heavy attacks, and resists death blows so long as you can regain a little health between resists. The Zealot's class ability Holy Fervor charges Saltzpyre forward and gives him an increased attack speed. Corellian, widely considered the most annoying character to everyone that isn't playing her, poor Lambarfoots, has the following choices. Waywatcher, perhaps the single most popular starting class and harder difficulty choice in the game. Waywatcher comes with the passive Amaranth, which regenerates her health up to 50% of her bar. Double ammo capacity, no range damage fall-off, ranged weapon zoom, and complete Elven Arrogance and Snobbishness. Okay, the last one isn't true, but given the general player base attitude is shut up, Corellian, it might as well be. The Waywatcher class ability is known as True Shot Volley, which fires off 3 arrows that'll actively seek their targets, with priority given to kill special enemies no matter where they are. Handmaiden essentially makes Corellian incredibly nimble with the passive The Dance of the Seasons, which increases dodge distance, offers a stamina regeneration aura, and gives her uninterruptible revives on down friendlies. The active skill Dash does exactly what you would expect, charging her through enemies in front of her. Shade, a sometimes seen choice on harder difficulties, with the passive Murderous Prowess, which gives all attacks 50% bonus damage when done from behind, and as any critical hit backstabs instantly kill man-sized targets. Combined with her active ability Infiltrate, where she becomes stealthed and can pass through all enemies for 10 seconds or until she attacks, this class can be useful as a boss killer in the right situation. And finally, Sienna, the fiery-tempered, unattended, Bright Wizard Pyromaniac, comes in these 3 flavors. Battle Wizard, tied with her second class as the squishiest class in the entire game, comes with the passive Tranquility, where not taking damage or casting spells for 8 seconds will automatically begin to drain some of the heat from her overcharge, increase her spellcast speed based on overcharge level, and increase range damage. Her active ability Firewalk will teleport her forward and leave a trail of flame behind her. Yet this has a high chance of not working properly, as you need to look up to get the most distance from it, and looking anywhere toward the ground can make it a very short hop. Pyromancer, sometimes seen at higher difficulties when the 3rd class is yet to be unlocked, comes with a passive Critical Mass, which increases critical strike chance based on the overcharge level and increased range damage. The active ability Homing Fire Spear is a heat-seeking fire missile that'll kill as many enemies as possible within its lifespan and always hits the head. Yet that skill is also notorious for its targeting system going completely haywire and useless in spasming on the ground at times. But when it does work, expect to watch entire packs of storm vermin vanish. When it doesn't, just enjoy the weird light show. And last, but very much not least, Unchained, which turns Sienna into a beastly monster tank focused on melee combat. This class comes with a passive Blood Magic, where 50% of damage taken is instead transferred to the overcharge level. There's no slowdown on the overcharge bar, and melee power is increased at high levels of overcharge. The active ability Living Bomb does pretty much what it says on the tin, allowing her to explode in an AoE bomb around herself and leaving a burning circle on the ground, while also removing all overcharge level. It makes it incredibly useful as a survival skill to dump excess heat and keep from having Sienna accidentally kill herself. Besides leveling up to unlock classes, you'll gain talent tree slots for every 5 levels, outside level 30, which is the cap, where you can pick between one of 3 talents to use at each level. Each and every class has its own unique talent tree, with a couple being universal, like level 20's choice. But the system would take way too much time to go into detail on. There are build guides for Vermintide 2 out there for a reason, and while a lot of the talents do seem like there is only one proper choice, you can thankfully change around those talents as much as you want back at the castle for no fee at all. As was briefly touched on with Barden, there are weapons that have class restrictions on them, like only the Slayer can use double axes, Barden's Ironbreaker can use Drake weapons, Corellian Shade can use the repeater crossbow, etc. Just make sure you check each weapon for what class can actually use it, and feel free to dismantle or save accordingly. This is where you might notice that each piece of gear has a power level to it as well, which does affect the gameplay rather significantly. So while you may be tempted to hang on to that power level 20 because it's blue, it'll be far better to switch that to a power level 60 green instead. In turn, this affects your hero power level, which dictates what difficulty you can play on, and how easy of a time you'll have of it. As you go higher in power level, your damage resistance and strength goes up, while letting you cleave through more enemies and have better stun resist. It also makes sure that anyone queuing for the higher difficulty levels has to earn that right, though we'll get into how much that might matter in community. So how do you get higher power gear? Well, you need to complete missions and level up to earn 2 different types of loot boxes respectively. Yes, the dreaded loot box. Yet, we'll need to be 100% clear here, these are not the loot boxes you're thinking of. Yes, they have randomized loot in them, and they're how you progress in terms of power, but they can only be earned by leveling up your character and completing missions. You cannot pay for these loot boxes, and depending on the difficulty you play at, will change what type of loot you get. Ranging from strong boxes at Recruit to vaults on Legend difficulty, they increase the likelihood of getting better gear. Yet even among the same type, there are 6 subcategories: Peasant, Commoner, Merchant, Soldier, General, and Emperor. The type you get is determined by the risk you take in gathering tomes and grimoires that need to be carried all the way to level completion, with a small bit of luck coming in the form of lucky loot dice that can spawn in the level, and Renaald's Gift, which is just a flat luck of the die roll. We'll discuss tomes and grimoires in a moment, but when you crack open these loot boxes, you are given 3 pieces of loot that can range in quality from white to orange on all difficulties and box types. If you are up to the challenge, you can collect all the tomes and grimoires while playing on Champion, and if you end up getting a General's Chest or above, you have the chance of getting red tier weapons or gear. And if you're feeling even more bold, doing the exact same thing on Legend difficulty can grant you cosmetic items. All in all, the system is a massive improvement, granting more loot per successful mission, ensuring any weapons that do drop are for the exact character you're currently playing and not whoever picked it up, and can be saved if you want to stockpile them and try for red weapons and cosmetics once you hit the gear level cap of 300. So why challenging and being bold? Well, the difficulty has been ramped up from the first game into some rather crazy new heights. When first starting out the game, Recruit difficulty levels feel incredibly tough compared to the original game, but do have a quick drop-off in that difficulty as you gain gear and levels. Veteran essentially starts to test your knowledge of your class and what your role within the team is. As an example, Dreskar uses the idea of a Team Diamond. Tank at the top and front, DPS and support to either side and slightly behind the tank, with the support at the back of the group to help cover flanks or watch the rear. Veteran is where you'll begin to understand where to split the team in terms of ambushes and flanking attacks as well, putting flamethrowers and beams at long hallways, and shields and rapid melee in more tight twisting areas. Champion difficulty is where you must know what your role is and to execute those actions quickly and efficiently. This is when even the slave rats begin to hit like storm vermin on Recruit difficulty, and friendly fire has been turned on, meaning you must do your job while maintaining good accuracy and situational awareness. This is where red weapons will begin to drop, assuming you can at least get a General's Chest. Legend is the difficulty where you showcase mastery of your class, and heavily punishes even simple mistakes. This is one of those difficulties where even if you have the gear score, do not attempt it without being at least level 25, which means you'll have all your talent slots unlocked. Adding to the overall challenge are the new and returning enemy types. While we won't just cover over the old enemies again, as they have not changed from Vermintide 1, so watching that review could get you up to speed, we'll cover the new and arguably more dangerous enemies that they've added to the mix. Starting simply, the Storm Vermin have been given a couple additions, firstly in Storm Vermin Captains, which wear brownish colors with their normal attire and are a bit tankier, but otherwise not that much different. The second addition to this group are the shield vermin, who are storm vermin that forego the halberd and instead use a single-edged longsword and shield, forcing you to break their guard before you can try and kill them, unless you headshot them from range while they're still unaware. The counterpart on the chaos side are the marauders, who wear heavy cast helmets and wield massive great axes that have a devastating vertical cleave. While it seems a bit odd, you should once again seek their armored head and ignore their overtly exposed stomachs and chests. Don't question it. Then we come to Chaos Warriors, massive hulking behemoths in full armor, weak only to headshots from melee and ranged attacks, that have incredibly lethal cleaves and sweeps and are surprisingly nimble given their size and bulk. This makes a little more sense as a weakness on them, as the touch of Nurgle usually rots out the face guard of the helmets, making them less armored than the rest of the body. Scarily, there can be Chaos Warrior patrols, and on Champion and Legend difficulty, these patrols can have up to 10 Marauders and 6 Chaos Warriors. Ouch. Flipping back to Skaven, we have the newly added Plague Monks, fast sprinting with his piercing scream and incredibly rapid attacks that are one of the most dangerous special enemies in the game. Fortunately, their loud cries of bloodlust let you easily know when a pack of these guys are barreling towards you, and their vibrant green clothing helps them stand out in crowds. The Chaos counterpart to the monks are the Berserkers, which sadly kind of blend in with the other Chaos units, only really distinguished by having a different tattoo pattern and the twin axes that they'll use to shave off massive amounts of your health in seconds. They do kinda yell and raise their twin axes in the air as they sprint at you, but all Chaos units really yell and run at you, so it's not as easy to spot them in crowds, much to the pain of many wiped Champion and Legend runs. Skaven's final addition to the roster of pain comes in the form of the Warp Fire Thrower, essentially similar to a Rattling Gunner, but instead bum-rushing straight up to the team before dousing them in burning Warp Fire that has a heavy knockback and puts a dot on each player hit. If you hit their fuel tank, they'll explode rather satisfyingly, which even the characters themselves will comment on. Chaos also brings 2 special mechanic enemies to the fight, the Blightstormer and the Leech. With the Blightstormer being a rather rotund, slow-walking fellow that sings to himself before casting an unholy Chaos Storm that sucks all nearby enemies and friendlies into it, burning them as they swirl around, and then tossing them in a random direction while putting a damage over time wound on them. They need line of sight to cast and complete the spell, but when they're done, if they're attacked before even starting the spell, they'll teleport away, oftentimes miles from the players. These guys can be incredibly annoying, and mad scrambles are often made to find that bloody storm douche before he can cast his spell. Leeches are on another level of trolling players, as they're similarly fat like Blightstormers, but barely move around at all. Instead, they teleport directly to a player before firing off a capture spell to pull them in and begin draining their life. Most annoyingly, that Warp-In can actually do a serious chunk of damage, so on higher difficulties, you can have leeches teleport directly onto you to shave off your health before they rub salt in the wound. These are accompanied by 4 different boss enemies, and while Roger the Rat Ogre makes a return, he is far more deadly, but his mechanics are roughly the same. However, we should mention that the strategy of using bombs has had a serious nerf from Vermintide 1 into 2, and potions have had their usefulness massively increased. First and foremost, the 3 new bosses aiding Roger in his evil plans to ruin your fun are the Storm Fiend, an armored version of Roger equipped with dual Warp Fire throwers. It is actually the easiest boss to deal with in the game, with mostly area denial attacks, and decently long windups on melee attacks, so you can easily bait and solo this boss. Plus, it has a massive weak spot on its back in the form of a deformed rat baby that you can beat on. The Bile Troll, arguably the hardest of the bosses, can be made trivial if you have the room to dodge his projectile vomit attacks. The special mechanic for these guys is that their vomit can coat you if you take a direct hit. It'll drain your stamina, reduce your vision, and slow you down. The Bile Troll also fall to the ground during the fight, at which point his missing health will be highlighted in yellow and require the players to quickly shave off that weak section of his HP bar. Any yellow left when he stands up will be turned back into health for him. Finally, there's the Spawn of Chaos, a sort of Chaos variant of Roger the Rat Ogre, that can choose to grab a player in its tentacle arm before chewing on them to regain health. If this happens to one of your team, you can use explosive bombs or any class skill that would cause a knockback to get the vile mutant to drop its meal. Just be careful. If you don't set your friend free, the Chaos Spawn will then use them as an incredibly damaging meat club before throwing them a fair distance away. Vermintide 2 also does something entirely new in the form of mechanics-based boss fights, like you might find in other MMOs. Yes, there's still no healer, but the boss fights rely on skill with your character to keep from taking damage, instead of requiring a healer to keep people within the fight. These proper boss fights range in terms of how much the player base enjoys them, but Dreskar's personal favorite is the fight against Skarrek's Spine Mangler, the Storm Vermin's warlord leader who uses dual swords and a halberd to switch between attack stances and styles. Just keep in mind these can be incredibly tough fights, and with 5 of these proper bosses, 4 of which are totally unique, there's a lot to be said about Vermintide 2's creativity. If you manage to down one of these big bads, you'll be thrown some bonus loot die as a reward. So with this lineup of nasties, you can understand why trying for those tomes and grimoires can be a very tall order indeed. After all, tomes take up the healing slot, and while you can drop it for a moment to heal before picking them back up, it means you can't save healing for when you'd most desperately need it. Grimoires also take up the potion slot, which, unlike Vermintide 1, are incredibly useful and often the deciding factor between an easy victory and a hard knockdown, drag-out fight. The second debuff is that grimoires will curse you, something that can be lessened with curse-resist items, as the curse will reduce your max health dramatically depending on how resistant you are. Keep in mind, while some of the tomes are easy to find, Fatshark went out of its way to make the vast majority of these very tricky to discover, and they are far more hidden than their Vermintide 1 counterparts. Yet, as if you needed more variety, when playing a mission and opening your loot, you'll have a chance of receiving a heroic deed. This functions kind of like the quest system from the first game, except it asks for specific difficulties on specific levels, and will have special debuffs associated with it. This is where grabbing things like tomes and grims is not as important, as the deed itself will grant you a specific reward displayed on the deed, with many people forming solid groups to try to claim those 2 Emperor chest bounties. Just keep in mind that some of these debuffs are incredibly nasty, so plan accordingly to complete them. To make things easier, you're given bombs and potions as a means to level the playing field. Yet it should be heavily emphasized that bombs are not the boss-killer throwables that they used to be, and instead are just far more useful for clearing out massive hordes, or at the very least temporarily knocking a boss back. Their damage to bosses has been significantly nerfed, but are a complete godsend when you're being overrun by the vile ratmen, whose AI likes to try and flank you as much as possible. It should be noted that the firebombs do not stun enemies, and instead are just there for horde clearing and putting dots on. On the flip side, potions have had their usefulness massively increased as stated briefly before. These come in 3 varieties. The yellow-colored Strength, which gives a massive increase in your firepower to all your attacks, including magic ones. If you want a boss to die very fast, then give Strength potions to a beam staff-wielding Sienna and watch their HP drain off. The blue-colored Speed Potion increases your attack and movement speed to insane levels, including the damage tick rate of beam staffs. If you want to see something crazy, give Speed Potions to Slayer Bardens with twin axes. Combined with their inherent speed boost from leaping, and the axe's innate armor piercing on all attacks, they will turn armored enemies into chunky salsa very quickly. Finally, we come to Concentration, a purple-colored potion that increases the speed at which you'll regain focus to use your class abilities much faster. Give these to classes like Corellian's Waywatcher or Sienna's Pyromancer so they can spam their Seeking specials often. In other good news, if you keep finding yourself not getting a particular weapon you wanted for your class, you can simply craft it yourself, which will then make an item within 15 levels of your top scene power level item. So if you've ever pulled a 200 out of a chest at some point, you can craft items between levels 185 to 215, which means your crafting can actually take you higher than what you've seen, so you don't need to just start from nothing if you play another character, which is even more worthwhile to do than in the preceding game. It should be noted that the crafting here is very bespoke, minus the RNG for rerolling traits like added stamina, attack speed, etc., or item quality level, or full-on specialties. Barring all that, you have control over what's crafted exactly. If you choose, you can also upgrade your weapons up to their orange tier of quality, and some weapons you'll find will have special skins called illusions that you can rip off of one of them and put on another weapon of the same type if you like its look. Though one thing to keep in mind is that if you want to salvage gear to get the crafting materials needed, you'll need to ensure that no character or its subclasses has that item equipped. A handy tip is if you're going to change your class and character, unequip all their gear first. When it comes right down to it, Vermintide 2 feels like everything is just far better than Vermintide 1. And it's sad that saying it seems so rare for a sequel these days. Well, let's see how the community fares in that regard. Being a 4-man team versus the forces of the apocalypse naturally means that you can bring some help along to stop the end of the world, or more appropriately, delay it for a bit longer. While you could choose to play with the AI or only bring friends along, you can instead join someone else's world or invite randoms into your own world to assist you. To do this, you can either open the server browser on the menu board and pick a specific experience you want to try, or set up a quick play which will automatically join a match that fits your difficulty selection. Keep in mind that while using a server browser, you'll need to check what characters are available, while quick play will get you into a match with your currently selected character. So how does the community fare when it comes to playing in a group of complete strangers? Surprisingly well, given that you make some exceptions for idiots every now and then. Let's face it, this is online gaming. And you can find a few tryhards and assholes out there, but anecdotal from Dreskar mostly, the groups he gets into are usually decent people just wanting to play. Yet there's a bit of caution to be had, as even if you have 300 level gear and on your 3rd or 4th character heading to 30, many people will refuse to have you in their champion or legend parties if you aren't at least level 20. And even some will refuse you if you aren't 30 already. Just something to keep in mind is talents do help out those classes a lot. In general, the category for this is more hit and miss, while also having far more players available in the first game. It does seem that the higher up in difficulty you go, the less likely you're to run into straight-up assholes, but people will expect more from their teammates at that point, so it kind of weeds out those players. Yet, if you don't have a group of friends that can play, then it isn't really an awful experience to try and play with others. Just keep your expectations to what the difficulty you're running will require, and you should be good to go. This will be an incredibly short section, as the game doesn't have any microtransactions or loot boxes, barring that hyper-literal example from earlier, and instead we'll be focusing solely on DLC for post-launch monetary value. The game's initial price is $30, and for the amount of content you get for a co-op experience game, it's hard to argue against that price or say it's completely unreasonable. When it comes to DLC, if they go the same route as they did in Vermintide 1, then only the host will even need that DLC to have everyone play it. Yeah, that's it. Seriously, move on. Well, this has been another nice surprise from the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Though we only really fudged Vermintide's one place into an MMO Grinder for use as a Halloween episode, in the long run, it meant playing through Vermintide 2, which essentially is the first game, yet better in every way. I'll say that the increase in difficulty might put some people off, but overall the experience is far more rewarding for those willing to put the work into it. Here's my final rating. The most obvious play point would have to go to Vermintide 1 fans, as the sequel is just an improved version of the first in every way. Fatshark took that solid foundation of the first game, polished up the level design, improved the loot system, made more interesting challenges, added boss fights, and further accented the combat system within the game. If you were a fan of the first, get this game, or rather you probably already have, given when this review is coming out. That combat system is our second point, as the melee combat in the game is truly incredible. Limbs will go flying from practiced slices, heads will erupt from a strong blow to the skull, Skaven can be sliced clean in half and desperately grab for their spilling guts. It is all incredibly violent and in your face, which is what makes that combat feel so good, and makes you want to get into those large hordes. If you like intense melee combat with great feedback on your attacks, then Vermintide 2 is likely for you. The game also has far more emphasis on high-skill play and tunes things to make the differences between the characters far more apparent than they were in the first game. The higher difficulties will challenge you and test your situational awareness to its limit, while offering better rewards and cosmetics for those that would take the plunge. If you're looking for something with depth and complexity along with class-based challenge, then give this game a shot. This will be a rather brief section, as there are no microtransactions, nor will there ever be according to Fatshark. So your pay options are the fact that you will need to buy the game in order to play it in the first place, while the second is that DLC will cost you some added cash. But if they choose to go down the same route as the first game, then only the host will need to fork over that dough to allow their entire team to play the new levels. Well, this will be an interesting category, but if you're looking for a game where everyone is on equal footing, then this is not the game for you. Much like the first Vermintide, only taken to 11 here, all the characters are unique in terms of their health pools, armor values, and what weapons they can wield, giving each an innate specialty that they can bring to the team. This directly contradicts what some have claimed about the game, as playing it even for a moment, you'll realize it's really nothing like Left 4 Dead. That last bit is exactly why people wanting a Left 4 Dead style game to hold them over for more Left 4 Dead content might want to steer clear. This isn't some harmonized experience where you pick one of 4 blank slates and everything is solely down to quick reflexes and good aim. While those are still there, you'll also need to understand your character and its subclasses' role in the team, along with what class abilities you're bringing to the table. If you listened or took to heart the reviewers and internet personalities that said this was just Left 4 Dead 2 but with rats, then sorry, they told you wrong. And if that's what you were expecting, you'll likely be disappointed. Outside of very basic mechanical similarities, this is not Left 4 Dead 3. Finally, if you can't get someone else to play with or a consistent group, then the game just isn't as enjoyable. The bots have received a major AI upgrade from the first game, but they cannot compare to a living person who can think and coordinate with you. Of course, Vermintide 2 has proven very popular, so you can simply queue up and go in with randoms, but that's where the community can be hit or miss, so proceed with caution. Next time, whenever that is, it'll be pretty similar to something that we did last year around this time. But as far as any big titles coming up, still waiting for a lot of shoes to drop, and the news we heard about some of the recent ones just doesn't make us looking forward to paying any asking price for it. But it's not like there's any lack of content to watch on this channel. We can have some side quests and backtracks still drop in here, and not to mention I've been doing indie stops, so there's like 3 episodes of that you can go watch. In the meantime, you could always just watch me make a fool out of myself on Twitch.